As the Vastherians' fleet descended upon Earth, the sky itself seemed to crack with the weight of their presence. Massive ships, dark as the void between stars, hung like ominous clouds over every continent. On the ground, humanity's defenses, once thought to be invincible, were crumbling. Airstrikes, energy beams, and warships blotted out the sun. Cities that had stood for millennia turned to dust in seconds. Buildings collapsed into the earth, and the once bustling streets of New York, Tokyo, and London became graveyards of steel and shattered glass. In the heart of this chaos, Ilara Dune, an engineer turned reluctant leader, stood in the ruins of what was once a high-tech military base. Her mind raced, but her eyes were focused on the task ahead. She knew that Earth's defenses would not hold much longer, but there was still one hope: a small group of survivors hidden beneath the surface, a last-ditch effort to launch humanity's final escape. It had been her idea, her plan, and now it was all coming down to this moment. "Get to the hangar!" she barked, rallying the few soldiers and civilians who hadn't given in to despair. "We launch tonight!" The group moved quickly, slipping through the smoke-filled streets, the air heavy with the scent of burning cities. It was surreal. How could the world be ending when they had fought so hard to survive? Only a few months ago, Earth had still been a thriving planet, its people confident in their advancement and strength. But that was before the Vastherians came, before their relentless siege began. Now, Earth was nothing more than a battleground, and humanity's greatest achievement, its home, was on the brink of extinction. As Ilara's team neared the underground hangar, the ground shook. Another blast rocked the city, sending dust and debris cascading down from the broken buildings above. A few of the team stumbled but caught themselves. Every step forward felt like a countdown. It wasn't just the clock ticking down to their escape. It was the clock of humanity itself. They entered the hangar to find their makeshift fleet, a collection of patched-together ships and barely functional tech. The ships had been assembled by a combination of military engineers and civilian volunteers, many of them not trained for warfare, but all driven by one singular belief: survival. A handful of these ships had been retrofitted to make the impossible journey, leaving Earth behind for the unknown vastness of space. "Everything ready?" Ilara asked, her voice steady but laced with an edge of desperation. One of the engineers, a quiet man named Jonah, nodded solemnly. "The ships are functional, but once we leave, we'll be on our own. No more reinforcements. No more hope of returning." Ilara hesitated, looking over the small fleet. She had never expected to lead. Humanity's last stand, never dreamed she would be at the helm of such an audacious, uncertain escape. But here she was, holding the future of her species in her hands. "Then we leave," she said firmly. "We'll make it one way or another. We survive or we die trying." As they climbed aboard the ships, the hum of the engines seemed almost surreal, like a dream they were too afraid to wake from. The doors sealed shut, and the ground began to rumble as the ships lifted off the ground, leaving behind the burning remnants of Earth. The city of New York was a crater now, and in the distance, the Vastherian ships continued to rain destruction down upon the planet. But there was nothing left for the survivors to do but leave it behind. Ilara watched the view screen as the skyline of the Earth faded into a blur of smoke and fire. It was hard to breathe. The weight of their loss settled on her shoulders like a mountain. Was there any chance of survival left? Would humanity truly live to see another day? And then a voice crackled through the intercom. "We're not alone," the voice said, shaky but clear. "There's something out there, something watching us." Ilara's breath caught in her throat. They weren't alone, not just in the galaxy, but in this moment. There were others who had been watching, waiting for humanity to make its move. And maybe, just maybe, there were those who would help them rebuild. We'll find out soon enough. Ilara murmured to herself, gripping the armrest. We'll find out soon enough. The ship soared away from Earth, the dying planet fading behind them as they entered the blackness of space. Ilara's heart felt like a weight pressing against her chest. Earth, Terra, was gone, and the vast expanse of the galaxy was now their home. Yet even as she looked at the stars, the enormity of their survival seemed almost unreal. The burning remnants of their world had been left behind, and with it, the legacy of humanity. The journey was long and perilous. The fleet of ships, all, patched together from leftover military vessels and civilian transports, moved in a loose formation, their once pristine hulls now marred by the scars of battle. The survivors, shaken but resilient, worked day and night to maintain the ships and their dwindling supplies. They could hear the hum of the engines and the creak of the hulls as they traveled deeper into the unknown. Food was rationed, and the air in the smaller ships began to feel stale. Ilara sat in the command module of the lead ship, her fingers running over the smooth surface of a small data tablet, its screen flickering intermittently. They had few working systems, and even fewer places to find comfort. She gazed at the star maps, searching for any signs of life, any planets where they might take refuge. But the galaxy was vast, and the risk of running out of resources was ever present. It had been over a month since they left Earth, and the survivors were weary. Still, there was no turning back. The Vastherians were relentless in their pursuit, and though the survivors had escaped the initial wave of destruction, they knew it was only a matter of time before the alien empire sent reinforcements. In the quiet moments, Ilara thought back to those last few hours on Earth. She could still see the faces of her comrades, the resistance fighters, the scientists, the children, still haunted by the look of terror in their eyes as they realized their home was falling. Yet there was something else she saw too, a fierce determination, a spark of hope. It was that same spark that had driven them to build these ships, to leave behind everything they knew in search of survival. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime. A message had arrived from one of the outer ships. "Ilara?" The voice of Jonah crackled through the intercom. "We've picked up something unusual." Ilara leaned forward, her interest piqued. "Unusual how?" Jonah's voice grew more urgent. "It's not a ship, and it's not debris. We think it might be alive." Ilara's brow furrowed. "Alive? What are you talking about?" "Just come and see for yourself," Jonah replied, his voice tinged with both excitement and caution. "It's moving, and it's heading in our direction." Without hesitation, Ilara stood up, gathering her things quickly. The command module, filled with blinking lights and humming machinery, felt colder as she left. She made her way through the narrow hallways of the ship, passing by people who were either at their stations or resting, trying to conserve what little energy they had. Their faces were weary, drawn. Every day was a battle against exhaustion, against hopelessness. When Ilara arrived at the observation deck, Jonah was already there, staring at the view screen. The screen was filled with the vastness of space, but there was something else. Something moving, a flickering light against the backdrop of stars. It was irregular in shape, shifting and pulsating as if it were alive. "What is that?" Ilara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Jonah replied, "but it's coming toward us." The object, whatever it was, seemed to react to their approach. The flickering light grew brighter, and for a moment, it appeared as though the object was trying to communicate. A pulse of energy shot out from it, and the ship's systems blinked in response. The lights, flickering, and the engines surging as if responding to some unseen force. Ilara felt a shiver run down her spine. "Is it a weapon?" she asked, her mind racing. Jonah shook his head. "I don't think so. If it were, it would have attacked us already. This feels different. I think it's trying to communicate. Ilara's eyes narrowed as she watched the object draw closer. It was no longer just a flicker in the distance. It was tangible, its form taking shape, a vast, strange silhouette against the stars. It was unlike anything they had ever encountered, its surface covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change, almost like organic tissue. A sudden jolt rocked the ship, sending both of them stumbling. The object had made contact, gentle, almost like a whisper. The lights dimmed, and the hum of the ship's engines faltered. "Jonah, what's happening?" Ilara demanded, gripping the railing for support. I don't know," Jonah replied, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and fear. "It's alive, and I think it wants us to follow it." Ilara took a deep breath, her mind racing. The galaxy was vast, filled with unknown dangers. But this could be humanity's chance to not only survive, but to thrive. "Prepare." "The fleet," Ilara said firmly. "We follow it." The survival of humanity rested in the stars, and this strange encounter might be their key to a future beyond the ashes of Earth. The fleet followed the mysterious object through the stars, its strange, pulsing light guiding them like a beacon in the dark. The journey was slow, but the survivors didn't mind. For the first time since leaving Earth, there was a sense of direction, a sense of hope. The object, which they had come to call the beacon, seemed to know exactly where it was going, and the survivors, despite their wariness, trusted it. It led them toward a distant star system, one that was not marked on any known maps. Days stretched into weeks, and the fleet's resources were stretched thin. Rations were nearly gone, and many of the ships were showing signs of wear and tear. The survivors worked tirelessly, patching up systems, maintaining engines, and trying to keep spirits high. But even the most optimistic among them knew the reality. They could not continue like this for much longer. Then, on the 27th day of their journey, the beacon led them to their destination, a planet, beautiful and serene, nestled in the perfect habitable zone of its sun. Seraphis. As the fleet entered orbit, the sight of the planet took their breath away. It was a lush world with sprawling forests, vast oceans, and cloud-capped mountains. From the window of her command ship, Ilara gazed at the planet below, her heart racing. It was unlike anything they had hoped for, a paradise untouched by war and destruction. There were no signs of intelligent life, no visible cities or ships. But the world seemed alive, full of promise. "We've arrived," Ilara said, her voice hoarse but filled with awe. "This is it. This is where we'll rebuild." Jonah, who had been standing by her side, nodded, his eyes never leaving the planet. "It's perfect," he whispered. "It's everything we could have asked for." The rest of the fleet followed suit, coming into orbit around Seraphis, their ships gleaming against the backdrop of the planet's deep blue and green hues. The survivors gathered at their stations, eagerly awaiting instructions. There was no time to waste. There was no guarantee that the Vastherians wouldn't eventually find them, so every moment counted. Ilara turned to Jonah, her mind already calculating their next steps. "We'll need to send teams down to the surface. We don't know what we're dealing with here. For all we know, this planet could be dangerous," Jonah agreed. "I'll assemble a team. We can deploy from the main landing craft. If anything goes wrong, we'll need to be ready to evacuate." Ilara nodded, then paused. There was something about Seraphis that felt different. She couldn't place it, but she felt a pull toward the planet, an inexplicable connection. She had to learn more, had to understand what made this place so special. That night, a team of explorers was sent down to the surface. Ilara watched from the command ship as their small crafts descended through the atmosphere, the blue and green, world growing larger in the viewport. The landing was smooth, and the explorers stepped out onto the soft alien soil, taking their first breaths of Seraphis's fresh air. The planet felt different from Earth, its atmosphere rich with unfamiliar scents. Towering trees with luminous leaves stretched high into the sky, and strange, colorful flowers bloomed across the landscape. The ground was soft and warm, and the explorers could hear the distant hum of something, perhaps the planet's natural rhythms, echoing through the air. But despite the serene beauty, there was an overwhelming silence, as though the planet itself was waiting for something. One of the team members, a scientist named Kira, took the lead. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity as she knelt beside a cluster of crystalline plants, their edges shimmering with iridescence. "These are unlike anything I've ever seen," she said, her voice tinged with wonder. "This place, it's more than just habitable, it's alive." Ilara, watching from the command ship, felt a chill run down her spine. The words alive echoed in her mind. The planet Seraphis was not just a haven. It was something more. Something ancient. The sensation of being watched was growing stronger, a feeling that the planet itself had been expecting them. As the explorers ventured further into the landscape, they stumbled upon the first signs of what appeared to be an ancient civilization. Half buried in the soil were structures, massive stone pillars, carvings that seemed to tell a story, and ruins that hinted at a forgotten people who once called this place home. The ruins were overgrown with vegetation, but there was no mistaking the technology and artistry that had once flourished here. Ilara's eyes widened as she saw the footage relayed from the surface. This was it. The answers they had been searching for might lie beneath Seraphis's surface, secrets waiting to be uncovered. This planet had been a hub of knowledge, a cradle of civilization. "Bring the others down," Ilara ordered, her voice resolute. "We need to learn everything we can about this place, and we need to do it quickly." Seraphis was no longer just a refuge. It was a key to humanity's future. But what it held beneath its surface, what secrets it whispered, could either save them or lead them down an even darker path. And deep beneath the soil of Seraphis, something stirred, as if it had been waiting for their arrival all along. Seraphis, for all its beauty and promise, held an undercurrent of tension that none of the survivors could ignore. The planet's surface was rich with resources, its atmosphere perfect for human life. But something about the ancient ruins, the strange energy pulses they had detected, set Ilara's nerves on edge. As the survivors began to build settlements, establishing a foothold on the new world, they worked quickly, knowing full well that the Vastherians wouldn't stay in the dark forever. Their enemies, relentless and merciless, would be coming. The first signs of danger came just 3 weeks after their arrival. The ground trembled as an unmistakable hum reverberated from deep within the planet, sending a ripple of fear through the colony. The Vastherians had found them. The deep space sensors had picked up a fleet, an entire battalion of warships, bearing down on Seraphis. Ilara stood at the command center, her gaze fixed on the flickering screen in front of her. Jonah, alongside several other engineers and strategists, watched nervously as the Vastherian ships closed in, their colossal forms visible through the tracking system. "They're coming too fast," Jonah muttered, his fingers racing over his datapad, trying to pull up any information they could use to defend the planet. "We can't evacuate everyone in time." Ilara clenched her fists, but her expression was steely. "Then we fight." Her decision was not made lightly. Humanity had barely begun to settle into this new world, their defenses barely up, their ships still untested. Seraphis had no established military. They were still recovering from the trauma of Earth's destruction. But the Vastherians had already proven they were capable of anything. Planetary devastation, total annihilation. There was no room for hesitation. "We need to move quickly," Elara continued, her voice sharp with authority. "Jonah, get the fleet ready. We'll need to fortify the settlements, establish a defensive perimeter, use the planet's natural resources. There must be something we can weaponize." Jonah nodded, rallying a group of engineers and soldiers to start retrofitting the makeshift defense systems they had managed to assemble since their arrival. They scavenged everything they could from the ships, pulling apart communication arrays, atmospheric shields, and anything with a power core. They worked relentlessly, creating improvised cannons, energy shields, and automated turrets to form a barricade around the primary settlement. Meanwhile, Elara met with the leaders of the other factions within the colony, scientists, former military officers, even civilians who had shown exceptional leadership abilities. Her eyes burned with resolve. "We cannot allow this planet to fall," she said to the gathered group. "We fight for Seraphis. We fight for the future of humanity." As the Vastherian fleet closed in, their massive ships cutting through the blackness of space like shadows, Elara felt the weight of the galaxy pressing down on her. The survival of the human race rested on this battle, and Seraphis was the last bastion of hope. The day of the battle came swiftly. The Vastherian fleet entered Seraphis's orbit, their warships dropping through the atmosphere like stones, firing devastating energy beams as they descended. Elara stood at the front lines, coordinating the defense with military precision. She had no time to second-guess her decisions. There were lives at stake, millions perhaps. The ground shook as the first wave of Vastherian dropships landed, their sleek, metallic forms skimming the surface before deploying armies of soldiers, weapons ready. They began advancing on the settlement, their war machines crushing everything in their path. Yet humanity had not been idle. They had built traps, created diversionary tactics, and lured the invaders into narrow choke points where their superior firepower could be used to greater effect. Elara watched from the command center as the humans, aided by hastily constructed weapons and defenses, fought with a ferocity she had not seen since Earth's last days. Their faces were grim, determined, but they fought as one, unified by the memory of their lost home and the desire to make a new life on Seraphis. Jonah, who had become one of the key engineers in the defense effort, barked orders to the ground forces, directing them toward the most vulnerable points of the enemy's assault. "Push them back! They can't breach the inner perimeter!" he shouted, voice crackling through the communications system. But even as the human forces managed to slow the Vastherians' advance, the alien invaders were relentless. Elara knew that they could not hold them off forever. The Vastherians had numbers, superior firepower, and, most terrifying of all, advanced tactics honed over centuries of conquest. The battle raged on for hours, the sounds of explosions and gunfire filling the air. The colony's defenses were holding, but just barely. As Elara watched the battle unfold from her command station, her mind raced. She knew they had to strike back, somehow in some way that would cripple the Vastherian forces for good. Then, a voice crackled through the intercom, catching Elara's attention. "Elara, you need to see this," Jonah said, urgency in his voice. She didn't hesitate. "On my way!" Within minutes, Elara arrived at the control center, where Jonah and the team were monitoring the battlefield. "What is it?" she asked. Jonah pointed to a live feed showing a Vastherian flagship, hovering just beyond the battlefield, its weapons primed and ready. "We've been scanning their command ship. We believe it's controlling the entire fleet's movements. If we can take it down, the rest of their forces might scatter." Elara's eyes narrowed. "Then that's our target. Get a strike team together. We're taking down that flagship." It was a dangerous move, but Elara knew they had no other choice. In the chaos of battle, they would strike at the heart of the Vastherian invasion and hopefully change the course of the war. The battlefield was a chaotic symphony of destruction, with the roar of energy weapons and the thrum of engines shaking the air. Ilara stood tall at the command center, her focus unwavering as she reviewed the incoming data on the Vastherian forces. The colony's defenses were barely holding, and every minute that passed pushed them closer to defeat. The Vastherians had underestimated humanity's will to survive, but their sheer numbers and advanced technology were beginning to make that will seem small in comparison. "Strike team ready, Ilara," Jonah said, pulling her from her thoughts. He stood by the communications array, his eyes intense. "We've assembled the best of the best, but it's going to be a hell of a fight to board that flagship." Ilara didn't need to hear any more. She had already made up her mind. "We don't have time to waste. Let's move." She turned toward the wide viewport, watching as the battle unfolded below. The colony's makeshift weapons were doing what they could to keep the Vastherians at bay, but it was clear they would soon be overwhelmed if they didn't hit back. Her thoughts were sharp and purposeful as she mentally mapped the strike plan. A small group of ships, heavily modified to be more agile and less detectable, would make their way toward the Vastherian flagship, which loomed in orbit, a shadow of its former pristine self after taking damage from the ground forces. Ilara had to act quickly to capitalize on this weakness. Jonah's voice broke through her thoughts again. "We've calculated the best approach. If we time it right, we can slip through their defenses. But the flagship has powerful shields. Once we're close, we'll need to deploy everything we've got." Ilara gave a quick nod. "We don't have a choice. Prepare the team for launch. I'll be with you in the lead ship." The night sky above Seriphus had turned an unnatural shade of crimson, lit by the pulsing glow of the Vastherian ships and the flickering of explosions on the surface below. Ilara, Jonah, and the strike team climbed aboard their ships, their mission clear: infiltrate the Vastherian flagship and disable its control systems. With the alien command center taken out, the rest of the Vastherian fleet might scatter, offering humanity a fleeting chance at survival. The fleet of small, nimble ships launched into space, their engines glowing as they shot toward the Vastherian flagship. The enemy ships fired bursts of energy in retaliation, their aim wide but deadly. The strike team dodged, weaving through the firestorm, their ships responding with calculated evasions. Ilara's ship was at the front of the formation, the ship's systems hissing and whirring as the crew worked to stay one step ahead. The flagship was growing larger in the viewport, and Ilara's pulse quickened. They were so close now. "Brace for impact," Jonah called over the comms. The ships barreled toward the Vastherian flagship, weaving through the barrage of energy blasts. Ilara could feel the heat of the energy beams near them, but they pushed on, racing toward their target. Their small ships were faster than the Vastherian vessels, but they were also far more fragile. They would need to use their agility to get in close. Any hesitation could mean death. As they neared the flagship, the intensity of the battle outside escalated. Explosions from the surface lit up the sky, lighting up the darkened void of space. Ilara's eyes were locked on the massive, dark silhouette of the enemy ship. It was a behemoth, thrumming with power, but even the most fearsome creatures had their vulnerabilities. Ilara's mind raced as she searched for the weak point, a crack in the armor. Suddenly, the flagship's shields flickered. "Now!" Ilara shouted, her voice sharp with urgency. The strike team accelerated, taking advantage of the brief window of vulnerability. Ilara's ship dove straight toward the flagship, slamming into its shield barrier just as the energy shield was dropping. A sudden jolt shook the ship as they breached the defenses, their hull scraping against the flagship's surface. "Prepare to board!" Jonah barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Ilara's heart pounded as her ship scraped against the flagship's outer surface, coming to a hard stop. The strike team quickly deployed, their weapons ready as they prepared to infiltrate the massive alien vessel. They had no time to waste. Ilara, Jonah, and a handful of elite soldiers suited up in combat gear, preparing to breach the flagship. The ship was an imposing fortress, a dark labyrinth of corridors and alien architecture. The air was thick with the scent of metal and something strange, foreign. Ilara's mind was focused, each step, each movement deliberate, as they moved swiftly toward the control room. The ship's halls were eerily quiet, the hum of the alien systems reverberating through the walls. As they moved deeper into the vessel, Ilara felt the weight of every step. The Vastherians were formidable, but she wasn't about to let them take Seraphis. Not again. They reached the heart of the flagship, a massive chamber where alien machinery pulsed with an eerie light. In the center, a massive console hummed with power. Jonah moved forward, quickly interfacing with the alien technology. "Almost there," he said, his fingers dancing across the console. "I've got control of their main systems." Ilara held her breath. They had done it. The Vastherians would lose their advantage. But before she could relax, an alarm blared through the chamber. A Vastherian commander appeared on the holo display, his cold eyes narrowing at the intruders. "Too late, humans," he snarled. "You will not survive this." The door behind them slammed shut, and the walls began to tremble. Ilara's heart skipped a beat as the flagship began to activate something deadly. "They're initiating self-destruct," Jonah gasped. "We have to get out, now!" Ilara turned to the strike team. "Move, now!" The countdown had begun. The heart of the storm was about to explode. The air inside the Vastherian flagship was thick with the sound of alarms, the blaring sirens warning of impending doom. Ilara's heart raced as she turned toward Jonah, who was frantically working at the control panel, his fingers a blur across the alien interface. Behind her, the strike team fanned out, weapons drawn and eyes scanning every shadow for hidden threats. "We need to disable the self-destruct," Jonah muttered, his voice tight with urgency. "If we don't, this whole ship is going up in flames and taking Seraphis with it." Ilara's eyes darted to the surrounding walls, the strange alien symbols glowing ominously beneath the flickering lights. The Vastherians had no concept of mercy, and it was clear they had planned for this. The flagship was designed to be a weapon of destruction, not just a command center. The self-destruct system was the final line of defense. "Keep working." "Jonah," Ilara commanded, her voice sharp and steady. "We'll hold them off as long as we can." The strike team fanned out, positioning themselves at strategic points, their blasters at the ready. Ilara, Jonah, and the others were in the heart of the flagship's control center, surrounded by vast alien machinery. The glow of the consoles was the only light in the dark chamber, casting eerie reflections across their faces. Suddenly, the door at the far end of the room slid open with a hiss. A wave of cold air rushed in as a squad of Vastherian soldiers stormed into the chamber, their imposing figures towering over the humans. The aliens' weapons crackled with energy, ready to unleash destruction. The strike team opened fire without hesitation, their shots striking the Vastherians with precision. The aliens retaliated with devastating power, their energy weapons cutting through the air with deadly accuracy. Ilara ducked behind a console, her mind racing as she calculated their next move. The Vastherians were too numerous and too well armed. This fight wasn't about winning. It was about surviving long enough to stop the self-destruct. "Jonah!" Ilara shouted, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of gunfire. "How much longer?" "I'm almost there," Jonah replied, his voice strained with effort. "Just give me a few more seconds." Ilara nodded, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the battle in front of her. The strike team was holding their ground, but it was clear they couldn't keep it up for much longer. The Vastherians were closing in, their relentless assault pushing the humans back. One of the Vastherians raised his weapon, a massive energy rifle, and fired a beam directly at Ilara's position. She dove to the side just in time, the blast hitting the console where she had been moments before. The explosion sent a shockwave through the room, knocking her to the ground. "Ilara!" Jonah's voice crackled through her earpiece, full of fear. "Are you okay?" Ilara pushed herself to her feet. her muscles aching from the impact. "I'm fine. Just keep working, Jonah. We don't have time." She sprinted toward the strike team, taking cover behind another console as more Vastherians closed in. Their alien armor glinted in the low light, and Alara could see their faces, cold, calculating, devoid of empathy. But it didn't matter. She had to hold them off. The strike team fought with everything they had, their weapons blazing as they took down one Vastherian after another. But the enemy was relentless, and for every soldier they dropped, 2 more took their place. Ilara's mind raced, her thoughts scrambling for a solution. There was no way they could keep this up forever. They needed to end this fight. "Jonah, how much longer?" Alara called again, her voice tight. "Got it!" Jonah shouted back, his voice triumphant. "I've disabled the self-destruct. The ship's going to power down in a few minutes." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. But Alara knew better than to let her guard down. The Vastherians might have lost their ultimate weapon, but they were still dangerous. The flagship wasn't going to fall without a fight. "Everyone, fall back!" Alara ordered, her voice sharp and commanding. "We need to get to the ship, now!" The strike team retreated, providing covering fire as they moved toward the exit. Ilara's pulse raced as she sprinted toward the door, the sound of the Vastherian soldiers' footsteps growing louder behind her. They were right on their heels, determined to reclaim control of their ship. The team reached the exit, but as they crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind them. Ilara whipped around, her eyes searching for a way to escape. The corridor was narrow, the walls lined with alien technology and flashing lights. The Vastherians were coming. They wouldn't stop until they had finished what they started. But just as the first wave of enemies reached the door, a massive explosion shook the entire flagship. The walls groaned and buckled under the impact, sending tremors through the ship. Ilara's heart leaped in her chest. The self-destruct had been stopped, but something else had triggered a catastrophic failure. "Jonah!" she screamed, her voice cutting through the chaos. "What's happening?" "I didn't do that." Jonah's voice came through the comms, strained with panic. "The flagship systems are unstable. It's going to collapse on itself." "Everyone, get to the ships," Ilara ordered, her heart pounding. "Now!" The strike team broke into a run, sprinting down the corridor as the flagship shook around them. Explosions rang out, and the lights flickered wildly. They had to get out, or they would be buried under the weight of the Vastherian ship. Ilara didn't look back. The flagship was coming apart, and time was running out. The only chance humanity had now was to survive. The destruction, and make it back to Seriphus before it was too late. The corridors of the Vastherian flagship trembled violently as explosions erupted from every direction. The ship was falling apart, its systems overloaded, and the walls themselves seemed to scream as they cracked and buckled under the pressure. Ilara pushed herself forward, the pulse of adrenaline keeping her moving as the ship seemed to lurch beneath her feet. "Keep moving!" she shouted to the strike team. They were all that stood between the Vastherians and Seriphus, and they couldn't afford to be caught in the wreckage of the collapsing ship. Every second counted. The team sprinted through the narrow, twisting passageways, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The flashing red lights from the emergency alarms cast a blood-red glow on the walls, and the air was thick with the scent of burning metal. A loud crack sounded above, followed by a massive explosion that sent a shockwave through the hall. The floor beneath their feet buckled, and Ilara's world tilted as she was thrown to the ground. "Get up! Now!" Jonah's voice rang out, frantic, as he pulled her back to her feet. He was gasping for air, his face covered in sweat and dirt. "We're almost there," Ilara nodded, gritting her teeth as she forced herself to stand. She could feel the heat of the fire that raged through the ship and the thrum of the failing systems all around her. They were running out of time. Ahead, the exit door to the docking bay loomed, but between them and salvation were a handful of Vastherian soldiers, their weapons still crackling with deadly energy. They hadn't yet realized that their flagship was on the brink of destruction. They were focused on eliminating the intruders. Ilara's instincts took over. She drew her blaster and fired, the shot striking one of the Vastherians in the chest. The alien staggered back, falling to the ground with a heavy thud. The others returned fire immediately, their weapons charging up for a deadly burst. "Cover fire!" Ilara yelled to her team. Jonah and the others immediately sprang into action, their weapons blazing as they returned fire. The Vastherians fired. In unison, their energy beams scorching the air around them. Ilara dove to the side, narrowly missing a blast that singed the edge of her armor. She rolled and came up behind a metal support beam, the sounds of battle deafening in her ears. "Push forward!" she shouted. "We have to reach the docking bay!" The strike team advanced with precision, moving in synchronized steps, blasting away the remaining Vastherians in their path. The air was thick with the sound of blasters firing and the scent of burning metal. Every step felt like an eternity, but they couldn't stop now. Finally, they reached the docking bay door. Ilara slammed her hand against the control panel, but the door refused to budge. Panic surged in her chest. "Come on, open!" she yelled, slamming her fist against the panel again. The ship groaned in response, its systems struggling to keep up with the chaos unfolding inside. Jonah's voice came through her earpiece. "Ilara, get out of there! The ship's going to collapse any second!" The sound of the ship's failing. Systems began to echo through the corridor, the groan of twisted metal, the whine of strained engines. The countdown was already running. The Vastherians had lost, but the ship was going to take them down with it. "I'm not leaving without—" "The others!" Ilara shouted. She stepped back from the panel and took a deep breath. They were so close, she could almost taste it. With a quick glance at Jonah, she grabbed one of the explosive charges from her pack and attached it to the control panel. "Get back!" she barked, and the team immediately retreated, taking cover behind whatever they could find. The countdown continued, the last moments of the ship's existence ticking away in the distance. Ilara pressed the button on her detonator, and the charge erupted in a sharp explosion. The door to the docking bay buckled and then slammed open with a deafening screech. "Move!" Ilara shouted as the team surged forward, charging through the now open doorway. The docking bay was chaotic, the space lit up by the flickering lights from the failing systems of the ship. In the distance, the escape ships, small, agile crafts designed for rapid deployment, waited. They would be their only hope to escape the Vastherian flagship's inevitable destruction. The team scrambled aboard the nearest ship, Ilara and Jonah the first to board. The ship's engines roared to life as the rest of the team followed, their weapons at the ready, scanning the bay for any last-minute threats. As the final member boarded, Ilara hit the thrusters, and the ship shot out of the docking bay, just as the flagship's internal systems exploded in a massive shockwave. The Vastherian ship's core detonated in a blinding flash, sending a ripple of energy through space. The shockwave caught the escape craft, pushing them forward with a force that rattled their bodies, but they managed to stabilize. They were free, but not unscathed. Behind them, the Vastherian flagship broke apart, fragments of the massive ship disintegrating into space. The survivors watched in grim silence as the enemy's greatest weapon was torn to shreds. Ilara's fingers tightened around the control panel, her mind racing as the stars ahead of them stretched out. They had won, but they had lost so much. Earth was gone, the colony was still fragile, and the Vastherians would undoubtedly send more forces to retaliate. "We have to go back to Seraphis," Ilara said, her voice steady but filled with unspoken resolve. "We've survived today, but this war isn't over." Jonah nodded from the co-pilot's seat, his expression a mix of exhaustion and determination. "We'll rebuild, and we'll fight for every inch of it." As the escape ship streaked through the stars, Ilara couldn't help but wonder what other trials awaited them on Seraphis. One thing was certain: humanity's fight for survival was just beginning. The escape craft plunged through the darkness of space, the shimmering remnants of the Vastherian flagship slowly fading behind them. It had been a close call, far too close, and yet, as the team sat in exhausted silence, there was a sense of relief. They had survived. But survival was only the beginning. Ilara sat in the captain's seat, her fingers lightly gripping the controls. The stars stretched ahead, distant and cold, but there was something about the vastness of the cosmos. That seemed different now. The weight of their victory felt heavier than the destruction they had left behind. The Vastherians were powerful, but humanity had proven something today, something the aliens had failed to understand. The will to survive, the refusal to give in, could overcome even the greatest of threats. "Seraphis in range," Jonah said, his voice breaking through the heavy silence. He looked over at Ilara, his eyes still haunted by the images of what they had just escaped. "We're almost home." Ilara nodded, her gaze fixed on the swirling blue planet that loomed ahead, a symbol of both hope and hardship. Seraphis was the last bastion of humanity, the colony that had survived the fall of Earth. And now, it was the last chance to rebuild. "We won't get any rest," Ilara said quietly, her mind already working through the logistics of what they had to do once. They landed. "The Vastherians won't stop coming. We need to fortify Seraphis, prepare for their next move." "I know," Jonah replied, his voice tired but resolute. "But for now, let's just get there. Then we'll figure out the next step." They continued in silence as the blue planet grew larger on the view screen. In the distance, they could see the faint outlines of the other escape ships that had managed to flee the Vastherian destruction. The colony was still there, still standing, barely, and it was all that humanity had left. Minutes later, the ship descended toward Seraphis's atmosphere, the fiery orange glow of re-entry casting an eerie light over their faces. Ilara's heart thudded in her chest as she steered the ship toward the landing zone. The ground crews were already on high alert, preparing for the influx of survivors, but they were not prepared for what was coming next. "Landing in T-minus 30 seconds, Ilara announced, her voice calm, but her thoughts racing. Every part of her wanted to break down, to let the exhaustion take over, but she couldn't. Not now. They had to be ready. As the ship touched down with a soft thud, the doors to the craft opened, and the strike team rushed out. The air was thick with tension. They were back on Seraphis, but the battle was far from over. The colony was alive with movement. Engineers scrambled to assess the damage caused by the Vastherians' earlier attacks. Civilians and soldiers alike worked together, reinforcing the colony's defensive structures, preparing for what they all knew was coming. The war with the Vastherians was just beginning, and they needed to be ready. Ilara stepped down from the ship, the heavy weight of her combat armor settling around her shoulders. She felt the cool breeze of Seraphis' atmosphere on her face, but it offered little comfort. There was work to be done, and the loss of Earth was still fresh in her heart, but she couldn't afford to mourn. "Not yet. Report," she barked as she approached the central command hub, where General Harlow and the rest of the leadership team were waiting. "Colonel Ilara," General Harlow greeted her, his expression grim but hopeful. "We've sustained heavy damage, but our defenses are still holding. We've had reports of Vastherian reinforcements moving toward Seraphis's orbit. It's only a matter of time before they launch a full-scale invasion." Ilara's eyes narrowed and she clenched her fists. The Vastherians were relentless, and they had learned nothing from their failure on the flagship. They would be back, stronger than before. But humanity had one advantage. They had something to fight for. "We'll need to strengthen our outer defenses, double the patrols," Ilara said, her voice sharp with authority. "And prepare for a counterattack. We don't wait for them to strike. We go after them first." Harlow nodded in agreement. "We'll make it happen. But Ilara, we can't do this alone. We need every able-bodied person in this colony working to fight back." "We'll rally them," Ilara said, determination flashing in her eyes. Humanity has faced extinction before, and we're still here. We'll stand together and we'll fight until we take this war to the Vastherians' doorstep. As the sun began to set over Seriphus, casting a soft orange glow over the land, Ilara stood on the balcony of the command center, gazing out at the horizon. The battle had just begun, but humanity had already proven its strength. The Vastherians might have underestimated them, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Jonah approaching, his expression weary but resolute. "We've made it this far," he said softly. "But it's not enough." Ilara nodded, her gaze still fixed on the distant horizon. "No, it's just the beginning. The Vastherians may have destroyed Earth, but they won't destroy us. Not while we're still breathing." Jonah stood beside her, looking out at the same horizon. "We'll rebuild. Together." Ilara smiled faintly, though the weight of the future still pressed heavily on her. "Together," she echoed. The stars above shimmered with the light of countless worlds, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the many challenges that lay ahead. But as long as humanity had the strength to fight, there would always be hope. And as long as Ilara had breath in her lungs, she would lead them to victory. The war was far from over, but humanity's spirit was unbreakable. And from the ashes of one world, they would rise to uplift 1,000 others.